All right, today we're jumping into a topic that is absolutely transforming modern healthcare, the dynamic, interconnected world of the real-world evidence ecosystem.
And just so you know where all this great info is coming from, this explainer is straight from the Evidence Mastery series. We're covering Chapter 4 of the book, Real-World Evidence, Principles and Practice by the brilliant Dr. Masood Tusi.
So, what on earth is the RWE ecosystem? Well, think of it this way. Real-world evidence doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's the product of this complex, almost living network where people, data, technology, and all the rules have to work together. Understanding how this network functions is absolutely crucial if you want to generate evidence that people can actually trust. Okay, so here's our game plan for today's tour. We're going to start with the people involved, the key players. Then we'll look at the data that fuels this whole system. After that, the technology that makes it all work, the ethical foundation of trust that holds it all together, and then finally, we'll take a peek into the future. First up, let's meet the cast of characters. We're talking about the people and the organizations that really drive this ecosystem. And each one, as you'll see, comes to the table with a very different purpose, a unique perspective, and yeah, some natural tensions.
You can basically break it down into 4 major groups. You've got the regulators, like the FDA, who approve new medicines. Then you have the payers and what are called health technology assessment, or HTA bodies, who decide if they're actually going to pay for them. Of course, you have the industry that develops these products. And right at the center of it all, you have the clinicians and patients. The thing is, every single one of these groups needs evidence, but for very, very different reasons.
And this slide, it just perfectly captures one of the central tensions in the whole system. A regulator is asking a fundamental question: is this product safe and effective? But a payer, well, they're asking a totally different question. Does this thing provide real value for our specific patients, and is it worth the price tag? See the difference? A drug can easily be approved by a regulator but then not get reimbursed because the evidence didn't answer that second crucial question.
Now, for the pharmaceutical industry, RWE is an incredibly powerful tool for just getting smarter. For instance, AstraZeneca used real-world data to figure out exactly which patient profiles were most likely to respond to a new treatment. By doing that, they could fine-tune their clinical trial criteria, and get this, they cut their patient recruitment time by a jaw-dropping 30%.
What's so great about this is that it's basically a practical checklist for success. Before you even think about starting an RWE study, you have to ask these questions. Is your goal actually relevant to a regulator? Does your comparison make sense to a payer in Germany versus one in, say, Japan? And maybe most importantly, are the things you're measuring actually meaningful to the doctors and patients on the ground? Okay, we've met the players. Now what's the fuel that makes this whole engine run? It's all about the data. And we're talking about a variety of sources that is just exploding, getting richer and way more complex every single day.
So traditionally, we've kind of stood on 3 main pillars of data. Electronic health records, or EHRs, give you that rich clinical detail. Claims data gives you massive, massive scale. And registries can provide super high-quality data on specific diseases. But, each one has its own problems, from messy data in EHRs to the lack of real clinical detail in claims.
And this is where it all gets incredibly exciting. The real magic, the real power kicks in when we start linking these different types of data together. I mean, imagine combining a patient's genomic data with their health record, or information from a smartwatch with their hospital visits. Suddenly, we're getting this 360-degree view of health that was pretty much science fiction just a few years ago.
And the power of data that comes directly from patients is just staggering. Check this out. One app that helps patients track their medication found a 42% non-adherence rate for people on oral anticoagulants. That is a huge, critical insight you would never see in the perfect, controlled world of a clinical trial.
So you've got all this data, right? Piles and piles of it. But it's totally useless if you can't make sense of it. And that brings us to the technology backbone of the ecosystem, the platforms and the innovators who are turning all this raw data into evidence we can rely on. It helps to break down the tech world into 3 main jobs. First, you've got the data aggregators. These are the folks doing the really hard work of cleaning and linking all that messy data. Then you've got analytics platforms that provide the tools to run rigorous, standardized analyses. And finally, you have the AI and machine learning specialists who are really pushing the limits, finding new signals and predictions in the data. Honestly, one of the biggest breakthroughs here has been the Common Data Model, or CDM. Think of it like a universal translator for health data. By mapping data from all these different sources into one standard format, researchers can run the exact same analysis across databases all over the world.
One study using this method took what would have been an 18-month analysis and got it done in just 6 weeks. It is an absolute game changer for global research.
But what about privacy? That's the big question, right? And that's where something called federated analytics comes in. It's a really clever idea. Instead of pulling all the sensitive patient data into one giant central database, you send the analysis code to the data, which stays safe and secure behind each hospital's firewall. The anonymous results get sent back. It allows for incredibly powerful research without ever compromising patient privacy.
Okay, now we get to the absolute bedrock of this entire ecosystem. Because none of this, not the data, not the tech, not the stakeholders, none of it works without trust. And that trust has to be built on a rock-solid foundation of ethics and clear legal rules.
And it's so important to remember that the rules are not the same everywhere you go. In Europe, GDPR treats data privacy as a fundamental human right, meaning you need very explicit consent for research. In the US, on the other hand, HIPAA tries to strike a different kind of balance, allowing for the use of de-identified data without that direct consent to help advance research. And you know, this whole landscape is moving fast. The new European health data space, for example, is trying to standardize data access across the entire EU. In the US, the 21st Century Cures Act is fighting against what's called data blocking to make information flow more freely. And global guidelines are really pushing for more community engagement, making sure local populations are involved in research.
And all this leads to a super tough emerging question that we're all grappling with right now. When a hospital's data gets licensed out for commercial research and money is made, who actually benefits? It's a huge debate that's pushing us towards new models where maybe that revenue can be channeled back to fund public health, so everyone benefits.
I just love this quote from an advisor at the European Medicines Agency. It really hits the nail on the head. RWE isn't here to replace the gold standard of randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. It's here to be the reality check. It tells us what actually happens when the rubber meets the road in the complex, messy, real world. So, as we look ahead, what's the goal? The future isn't just about getting more real-world evidence. It's about getting better real-world evidence. Evidence that's more diverse, more rigorous, and above all else, ethically grounded.
And that wraps up our tour of the RWE ecosystem. If this really got you thinking and you want to dive a whole lot deeper into these concepts, I can't recommend the source material for this enough. It's Real-World Evidence, Principles and Practice by Masoud Tusi, and you can find it on Amazon.com. Thanks so much for joining me.